How do? So where do you start with a relief carving? Hi, I'm Chris. Welcome to King Bespoke Creations. So you fancy doing a relief carve? Where do you start? Well, with the simple stuff really. First of all, you need something to carve. You need a picture. So I'm going to do this beautiful pretty little bird. Then you need a chunk of wood. Any wood will do. I'm going to use this piece of apple. I'm leaving enough space on here, it's quite important this bit, that the bottom and the top will get chopped off later. That gives us places to clamp where we don't need to worry about damaging the wood. It also gives us extra little runoff space should we need it. So don't cut your piece of wood to the exact size until after you've finished your carve. Okay, what else do we need? Well, fairly obviously, you're going to need some chisels. And a few different types. Big gouges, small gouges, V-chisels are nice. A really sharp knife is useful. So you could use something like a Stanley knife like that. Maybe a chisel that looks a little bit like that. It's beveled on both sides. Now I've done a few videos before on how to start carving. So we're not going to go into the very beginner stuff of actually how to carve, because watch the video and I'll see if I can be clever and put a card up here for you. Now, the first issue we've got with actually carving the piece is how to hold it, because obviously it needs to be sat still. Now with something like this that's got a roundy back, that makes it even tricky. If you're using a flat piece of wood, you can quite easily clamp it on the corners to a flat table and chip away. That's not going to happen very well with here. I could make a caul, a clamping caul, so something that fits that would then hold it flat. I could screw pieces to this, because remember this isn't the finished size, so I could screw a big board to this that I can then clamp in a vise or clamp down to the table. But here's another trick that you might not have seen before. Sometimes for an odd sized piece like this, we can use a clamp like this in a vise. So we can stick that in there, pull the dead end up against and clamp that in. Put your piece of wood in there, presto, you can hold that as tight as you need and chip away on there. Right, so obviously before we can carve anything, we need to transfer that picture onto the wood. Now the easiest way I've found, whether it's carving or doing pyrography, the wood burning stuff, is carbon paper. And then just using a bit of masking tape, seal up one end of it. I've only done one end. I'm not trimming the top end off. I'm probably not even going to bother cutting the sides off, to be honest. But it means by doing that, you can fold it out of the way, check what's going on, and then put it back knowing it's in the same position all the way through. So you can see that's very simple, no detail on there at all, but it definitely gives me the correct shape that I want to be carving out. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to carefully go around this outline with a knife, not very deep, doesn't have to be massive for now, but just to give me that definitive outline all the way around. Then we need to lower the edges, all the parts that aren't the bird sat on the stick, down to whatever depth you decide. Now some relief carvings you only want maybe a tiny little bit showing as a suggestion. Sometimes you might want to take it a little bit deeper. That's entirely up to you and what you think you might want to go for. On this one, I think I'm probably going to go for, I don't know, maybe half an inch, a centimetre, something like that, all the way around. So I could draw a line all the way around as well, so I know what's going to do. And then to remove all of that stock, there's a couple of different ways that you can do it. Now, one of the ways to remove all of that excess is with a router. Now I've used this on larger surfaces where there's a lot to remove and there's only maybe a smaller section of carving needed to stay in there. So the router works really well. It gives you a very consistent flat base to work from, which is very useful. But I think on this piece, it's probably a bit of overkill. It's a little bit too big, it's too much like the board slipping and end up chopping the bird's legs off. So what else could I use? Another option would be to use something like this. So this is a Dremel and it's got a tiny little attachment. Now you can buy a proper router based attachment, but I find this is pretty much good enough. If you're not using the big one, you want the small one. So you can use something like this. You can set that to a nice depth. It's got very minute control over it and can do a very nice job. So that's definitely an option for this piece, I think. Or of course, we could just go full traditional and use our chisels from the start. And you know, I think that's what I'm going to do on this one. There we go, I've scribed all the way around with the knife. Now what that does is it makes it stand out a little bit more so we can see it better, but it also means as we come in, if there's a slight chip or tear, it's more likely to end at that point rather than just continue all the way through. Now I've only done it light because I only want to take off little bits at a time. We don't just want to go in and try and chip off a full centimetre in one go. Right, now to remove all of this area around the edges. Right, so I've decided I'm going to go with the chisels from the off. It's what we're here for, isn't it? To use the chisels. So let's go over that. The other big advantage of actually doing this is it starts to show you which way the grains in the wood want to work. We can often find on a flat piece of wood that the grain direction seems to run in one direction, and it can do that on this side of the wood, but sometimes it works the opposite direction on the other side of the wood, and we need to know where that changes because that's going to affect which way we come in with the chisels on each part. So it helps us out. So if I've got a strip down this side, a strip down that side, and little bits in the middle, I can start to test which way that grain's working, and I'm going to know when we actually do the proper work which way to come in. Okay, so looking on the outside, the grain seems to run up in this direction here. So if I chisel along like that, everything should be fine. Let's test that theory. Yep, everything's curving off nicely. It's leaving me with a beautiful crisp edge. If I came in that way, I would expect it would start to tear. Yeah, it's wanting to chip. You can see the difference straight away there. So even though that we're going to be using incredibly sharp chisels, and we're going to have to come in at different angles for different sections, knowing which way the grain pattern works is really, really important. And a router just isn't going to tell you that. Now flipping it round, this side wants to come up this way. So that side's pointing that way with the grain, this side is pointing the opposite way, but we also have a knot here that will probably cause things to fluctuate. So let's see if we can work along this edge, and then we'll show you how to do the bits in the middle when we get there. So this is where we come to a tricky bit. So here we can just groove down out towards the end. This section here is a little bit more difficult because the grain wants me to chisel that way in. You can see on the sides here just about how all the grain goes up that way. So the chisel wants to come in that way without splitting. But I can't go in like that because I'm going to end up digging into here. So as long as you're carving downhill, that's the most important part, which is what effectively we're doing when the grain runs up there. We can start at this end and cut off decent chunks diagonally running down into the grain patterns, and it should still chip off nicely. So that's most of the bulk taken off that we can just kind of fairly savagely remove. And now what I'm going to do is go through and actually do quite a steep edge from here out. Okay, so I want to get every piece, so even the tail sections and the legs that obviously will be at different heights at the finish. I just want everything that I want to keep at the same height and remove off in a stark way to begin with. So this is called the stop cut technique. So you go through with a knife, scribe a little line, and then cut up to that line with your chisel, knowing that it's not going to go any further. You're not going to get any nasty splits. It's not going to do anything that you don't want it to do. Very effective. Now another way to do the same trick is to use a V carving chisel. What a brilliant tool this is. So this cuts the upright edge and the flat edge at the same time. Now because of that, it means you can use it in any direction with the grain pattern, as long as you keep it sharp. So you can go around the edges of an area, getting it to the right depth, and then just clean out the center section with a standard chisel. And here's that double bevel chisel again with a nice sharp point to the end. Really good for getting into those tight spots where you need to have a real crisp, clean edge. Okay, so here's a little something here. I'm trying to chip away this area, and as I go in there, there's this big section there. Can you see that move? Okay, so there's a little bit here. There's been a crack that I've filled previously, but as I come through, that crack is still there and it wants to chip off this end bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to carefully pull away this part behind here that I don't want, and then flood this area with super glue again, let that set, and then we can carefully come in and carve it again. Go, and with a squirt of accelerator, that's ready to work on again. Well, there we go. So that's how we start the relief carve. So pick your depth, take away all the excess that you don't want, so you're left with one flat level, and then from there you can decide which bits to round off, which bits tuck underneath, and which bits need a bit more detail. Well, there we go. So that's how we start a relief carve. Now, after that, you've obviously got the carving to do. So in this instance, like we say, we've got this nice pretty picture that we've carved in, and I've done that and then coated that with a nice Danish oil. Whatever picture you're going to do, or geometric shapes, or whatever it is you're going to work on, you can practice that as a separate entity. But that's how we get to that first initial stage, whatever it is that you're going to carve afterwards. Now, if you've enjoyed that, make sure you click the subscribe button, definitely smash that like button for me. Leave a couple of comments. What would you like to see in future videos? Do you want some more carving stuff? There's going to be lots of guitar stuff coming up as well. Let me know and we'll see what we can do. Until next time, go and sharpen your tools and I'll see you soon. God bless.